There we go. So I wanted to do that so that way I can delete the other one and actually have relevant information instead of me fucking around in one. Once again, can you guys are hearing me fine? Everything's good. Okay. So we're going to start off with the absolute basics. And we're going to start at the top, which is, and it's actually relevant because they've changed how quite a bit of this information works with BFA because you no longer have legendaries, you no longer have your Azerite points, your artifact points, whatever. Now you have your Azerite traits. So we're going to start with the summary. So for all intents and purposes, let's go with Lycora because picking on Lycora is fun. Where is Lycora? There she is. All right. So through this, you'll be able to find out what trait. This is not going to be super useful for yourself because you should know what your own traits and Azerite powers and all that shit are. So that part is completely and utterly irrelevant for all intents and purposes. The big thing that is actually important here is for analysis with for comparison against other people. So, for example, let's say I wanted to compare Lycora uh, against another survival hunter. So we go with this damage. So you just keep the base settings more or less as they are. Now I would go through and just look for another survival hunter. Preferably always look for one from a US and not as Roland or whatever else. So we're going to go with Desvrix. So for example, if you look at this, you're going to see that Lycora is going to be on the left. We're going to have the comparison guy on the right. So you'll be able to see where the talent differences are. You're going to be able to see what your primary stat is. Never neglect when you're doing comparison to compare the primary stats. The primary stat comparison will 9 times out of 10 give you you can do everything right, and this was a case with Santos. His casts were on point. Everything was fine. He just had 2,000 less intellect or something ridiculous like that, 800, 900. It was a substantial amount. So it ended up with all of his stuff just doing less damage. Sometimes it could be as simple as that. If that happens, the reason that that's happening is either A, your weapons are lower, B, your Azerite pieces are lower, despite having the same traits, or C, it's often coming down to your feet, legs, enchantments. Like, for example, if they're rocking the plus whatever intellect and gems or whatever else there is, stuff along those lines, that will make a very big difference. As will neck levels, because if you look at this here, this is hers is 80, other guys is 92. So it's not a huge amount at this point, but it's something that will scale up as time goes. And those are not the right neck levels by any stretch of the imagination. So those numbers are dramatically more differentiated than it would otherwise seem. But despite that, Lycor is only 200 or so behind, which is fine. That's an acceptable amount of variance. Um, but for some reason you have more stamina, so I'm guessing you have better rings than he does because rings are going to be the primary differentiation between those points. You have your trinkets as well. Never use the gear itself as a thing because this is horribly inaccurate. So generally you're going to see like the wrong eye level pieces on these in a lot of situations. It's just how this works. It's a bit of a bug in the display setup. And it's especially true on the Heart of Azeroth. Heart of Azeroth is a great example. Yours is not a 295. It's clearly stated it's a 327, but it's showing you 395. So you're going to have differentiation there. But the main point to look at here are these. So for example, Thunderous Blast, and you can click the little portrait to get an exact pop-up link of exactly what it does. Um, So the pop-up for this, you'll be able to go through, see what it does, compare it at different levels. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think we're going to be hitting on eye level 1300 on our neck, just throwing that out there. But you can still go through and say, look at the difference between the necks. So Lycor has 327, the other guy's at 346. So even at even at even at the exact same item level, you're going to be noticing quite a substantial difference because of the 20 item level difference. So like Hora's only be getting 1055, whereas the other guy's going to be getting 1252 per. Stack that up 3 times, increase the crit modifier, etc., etc. These bonuses will end up very, very substantial. So, like Horror, this is one of the problems you're running into. You're not rocking the Thunderous Blast. Basically, you're no offense, but your traits are somewhat in suboptimal right now. So because of that, your numbers are going to be lower. If you go to Blood Mallet, for example, you'll be able to go here and do your Azurite trait comparison. So you do have latent poison, which is actually the better choice, but unfortunately you've got 2 ranks of that and one of Razan's Fury. Oh no, Gut Ripper is your number 2. And Gut Ripper is somewhere. I'm not even seeing it. Oh, Razan's. Okay. But yeah, so stuff like that will make a big difference. One thing that has been commented on is that Thunderous Blast, the Sims for it aren't actually correct. In a lot of situations, Thunderous Blast is actually outscaling a lot of other traits that, according to the Sims, it should be ahead, it should be behind, but it's beating them. And Solich can speak to this to a degree in regards to his testing because the thing hits like a motherfucking train. And part of the problem is that it can also crit itself. Like outside of the guaranteed crit, it can crit, but it can still crit in between, which is the problem and one of the big reasons why its sims are not always super accurate because they're not going to be simming you with crit. They're simming it base, and unfortunately, Thunder's Blast when it crits is ridiculous. Um, so it just kind of stacks up. So that's the basics of it. Just stat comparisons. You're on the left, they're on the right. Compare your numbers. Who wins? So this guy here, he has a lot more crit, a lot more haste, a lot less verse, and a lot less mastery. Um, Apparently that's what worked for him. His talents are literally like I think you guys have 1 or 2 in common across the board. So I don't know enough about Survival Hunter to say one way or another what's the right call here. Um, but it's something to look into. So you can go at this and go, okay, so here's where my parse is. I want to bring it up. What could be a problem? You can go to your talents. You can do a talent comparison. You can check. So if you go to here, you can click rankings. That'll bring you to a new page. Go for classes, hunter, survival, and if you go through this, you can actually see what all the top Azurite powers are. So yeah, it's all latent poison and power overwhelming. Nothing else is really showing up for the most part. But besides that, you can also see the talents. So Viper's Venom is apparently this is kind of the go-to spec. You can tell on the right side over here. You can see that Viper's Venom in 8 out of the 10 parses, that's the choice. Gorilla Tactics, 10 out of 10. Bloodseeker, 10 out of 10. Mongoose Bite, 10 out of 10. So it can give you a really good idea to find little things that maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe you were missing a little bit. Maybe you got wrong information. God knows wrong information has been out there in regards to the Sims, in regards to the guides, in regards to all that shit because it's all wrong. You'll also be able to get a good idea where trinkets are sitting. So every single top parser has a Dark Moon deck of Fathoms. Every single top parser, except 2, has a Dark Moon deck of Fathoms. 9 out of 10 Fathoms. 9 out of 10 Fathoms. 10 out of 10 Fathoms. That kind of thing. So you can go at this and go, okay, so how much is that trinket worth? You can go into Blood Mallet. You can sim it yourself. You can find out how much of a DPS differential you're going to be missing because you don't have that trinket. So right now, where is Fathoms? Fathoms will be orange. So right now, Fathoms is competing with eye level 400 talents. The only one that is comparative is the Gale Caller's Boon. Gale Caller's Boon. I really need to. Um. So the only one that's really comparative to it by any stretch of the imagination is either 385 Plume, 385 Harlan's, or Gale Caller's Fishmate Spyglass, stuff like that. And even then, it's ahead of most of them. So you can look at this and go, okay, so it's doing 1012 there, it's doing 975 here. So there's not that many trinkets that will pull it ahead. And given that Fathoms can crit and all that fun bullshit, it means that in the grand scheme of things, that is something that will be making a very big difference. That is something that's like 1,000 DPS right there off that one singular trinket. Or versus like Horus. So you can go through, you can add up your different trinkets, see what the difference. For example, Dynabone Charm, if I'm not mistaken, is not a super high parsing trinket. Nah, especially at the item level that you have it at. So it's 325, so that's going to be roughly, let's say 550, 600, which is quite substantially different from 900. So that's half a thousand DPS differentiation off a singular trinket. Make sense? Again, these are the basics, and it's because I'm sure we have people within the raid that don't know the basics, so I'm starting there, working my way forward. Now we're going to move on to the damage done. So this is going to be the number 2 place that you're going to go for comparison to see where your issues might be. This can help identify things like low haste, low crit. Are you hitting the right buttons in the right proportions? Stuff of that nature. So for example, here, because you don't have Mongoose Bite, if you look at this guy, in 45 casts, it did how much of his damage? A bunch of his damage. Unfortunately, you don't get the exact percentage comparisons when you're doing a comparison guide. But in 45 casts, it did more damage than your kill command did for Emerald. That stuff is this kind of thing that can really make a big difference. Your damage otherwise, your Serpent Sting ended up a bit lower, I'm guessing because of another comparison. Um, your latent poison offset a bit of the difference there because he didn't have that. But it's stuff like this that you need to look at and figure out, well, where am I going wrong? What can I do to up these numbers? Because your stats are pretty comparable. So the difference in average cast will not be huge, or at least it shouldn't be huge. So for example, his average cast for his kill command was 2.6, yours is 2.9. Your kill command did more damage. Great. Now you got to figure out, okay, so if my kill command is doing more damage, if my you have Raptor Strike, he does not have Raptor Strike. I'm guessing that's because of a talent choice he made, or just it's not something he's casting. So it looks like more likely than not, you're sinking your energy into Raptor Strike, he's sinking it into Mongoose Bite. Your focus, sorry. His Serpent Sting, he did 4 more of them. Each one of them hit uh, about 3.5 times harder. So you might want to look at the numbers for it. And figure out where you're sitting, what differences you can make just off this. So you want to look at your cast compared to his cast. You want to look at your average cast versus his average cast, because that'll tell you how hard is your attack hitting versus his attack. All right. Um, the rest of this is largely going to be the next 3 categories are more or less going to be for if you're dying and you don't know why. What are you doing differently to die versus him surviving? Stuff like that. Next up for DPS comparisons at least, once it loads. Come on, you can do it. There we go. So another thing you're going to be wanting to look at, and this is going to be especially be relevant if right now, because not all of us are going to be popping pre-pots, second pots, etc. Whereas they're going to. So it's going to make a difference there between what buffs you have versus what buffs they have. So this guy didn't have a food buff at all. So he did the parts that he has is without a food buff. But it's with but like Ori, you have your food buff, so that's going to be a difference there. Pre-pots are going to be a thing. Mongoose Furies, so he had 85% Mongoose Fury duration, which means that he had that up a great deal of the time. The Trade Winds buff, 30% activity levels, which is giving him a bunch of additional mastery. You're both rocking the loaded die, so your uptimes are very comparable to his uptimes. No real difference then. You'll be able to see when the hero happened. So we both actually heroed at around the same time. So that's not a very relevant factor. You're a troll, so you have Berserking. He has Blood Fury. Right. Um, where is it? You'll also be able to check for raid buffs. Do you have all the raid buffs? Did he have all the raid buffs? Did you have the right bonuses at the right times? What was your uptime on your different abilities? So, for example, I have no idea what the hell this ability even is or what it does. Um, let's see. Flanker's Advantage. So, for example, he got more of the reset procs, according to this. He got 4 more resets versus you, which meant that he should have 4 more kill commands than you, which would explain some of the difference between where you are and where he is on count, because he was at 158, you were at 144. So you needed to cast a few more, but that wasn't the big thing. He also had the resets. He also had the mongoose bites, so his spec was a bit more active, a bit more involved. Um, and now the last category that's relevant. This is mostly relevant for casters, stuff like that, but still a very relevant piece of information. Um, so this is where you go cast. So for example, under damage done, the cast category is horribly fucking inaccurate. You did not do 144 kill commands. I know you wish you did, because your damage would be fucking enormous, but you didn't. So for finding your actual cast breakdown, you're going to be going to cast, because that'll tell you exactly how many of them you cast. This will tell you what your uptime was. So for example, your Serpent Sting, it only had a 41% uptime, which would explain the differentiation between you and him. Partly, because that's a lot of damage just left on the table, right? So in the future, that means you can go, oh shit, I could just maintain a higher uptime on my kill command. You can look at your pheromones versus his pheromones. He cast it dramatically more. Given that he had a higher parse, well, that means that more likely than not, that explains the difference between, because of pheromone bomb. Kill command has 100% to reset against target code with pheromone bomb. So because of that, he had the pheromone bomb up more. Since he had the pheromone bomb up more, it meant he got more free resets, which meant that he got a little bit further ahead on, theoretically, than where he should have been on Cass. So it's all these little things that really add up over the grand scheme of things. Um, so that's the first part of all this done. Any questions, comments? Hello? All right, well, continuing on then. Anyway, so after this, that's the basics for how to do a comparison. If you want to be looking at another relevant factor, if you're dying and other people in the raid are not, you can go through here, figure out exactly what killed you, hello, what did the most damage. Um, oh no, it's fine. Um, so that stuff to look at is damage taken if you're dying. You can do that if we're live logging, which is something we really need to get into the habit of doing, honestly. You can do this in between polls. You can use your details to figure this out. But either way, it's something you should be going through if you're having a death issue. It's something that needs to be looked at, that you need to be taking an eye at and trying to figure out what the problem is and how you can resolve that. Because that is going to be a very relevant factor, and damage taken is surprisingly useful once we get into Mythic. Sorry, excuse me. Next category, problems. So when you go to the problems category, this is going to tell you raid-wide information. So, for example, on this, we don't need the other guy. So where the fuck is he? Bye. Um, so we're gonna go back to Fed and Devour. We're gonna go problems. So you're gonna look at this, and we're gonna go, okay. So what were the problems that the raid had? An example being nobody used potions. That's generally considered to be a bad thing. You can go through and see, did I use my health still in that fight? Was that something I had active if I died, etc., etc.? Um, Ignore the eye level requirements. Slow deaths, this is mostly a healer situation, but this is something that the healers 100% need to keep an eye on. If somebody is dying a slow death, that is 100% preventable. Um, this is a 100% avoidable problem. This is something that the healers need to work on 100%. So the fact that Dwarts died to Putrid Perioxum, uh, That's not a good thing. That's a really concerning factor and something that would need to be addressed over the grand scheme. Avoidable damage, however, he Dwarts also took a shit ton of avoidable damage that fight. So it might be that they didn't actually heal properly. It might be that he just took too much damage because he was standing and stupid. That's when you kind of need to go through and actually break down what the avoidable damage was. So it was rolling regurgitation, which was the breath, which could theoretically have been what pushed him over on top of the putrid paroxysm. Uh, this is looking at who did the mechanics best. So you can go through it and you can go, okay, so as an example, like Horror, you were 6% of the total damage to the corpuscles, which if you didn't have your harpoon up in time, okay, that makes sense. You know, your melee takes time to get there. Some of the range need to get over there a little bit faster, a little bit higher on them range numbers. Um, we shouldn't have a melee topping up the meters on who got to the corpuscle first. We did well in the melodious miasma, but at the same time, this is something you're going to be wanting to check for yourself, see how many hits you took, because even if you passed, quote unquote, that's still something that can contribute to a wipe. That is still something that identifies a weakness within your play that you can 100% work on and address. Um, and it's something to always keep an eye on, even if it's considered a pass by the raid analysis, whatever, not actually relevant. Um, so this one here, so this is explaining what all the mechanics do, how they work, all that fun shit. So for example, Dwarts kept dying from putrid perioxin, which means he was standing too close to somebody who had the debuff. Um, or not, I don't know. I think that's mythic only. Um, but yeah, so this is just showing how often he took damage. If you look here, Dwarts, buddy, you ate a shit ton of putrid paroxysms, whatever. Uh, Terrible Thrashes should be primarily a tank mechanic. However, you'll notice Mr. Fries ate one early on, Bilbro ate one. That was actually a tank problem. That's not so much a you problem, although it probably means you were standing a little close to his face where you shouldn't have been, but it's not a huge deal. That's mostly if the tanks are lined up properly, this is how they can analyze their issues and what problems they're making. Uh, yeah, cheating death for 3 seconds afterwards. um, but yeah, this is a very relevant. This is a very big part in analyzing not your DPS performance, but your mechanical performance. And this can make a very big difference as to does the guild get the kill or not. Another thing I'm going to look at here. So here's another thing we can do. So this is something that is a very underutilized feature by a lot of guilds, a lot of people, but it's something that I've used with Soul a couple times in the past just to check out what issues there are. So this is actually a complete replay of the fight itself. So up here you'll see that's where Fries took the cleave. So that was right around here, I think, and that's not due to any fault of his own. He was just the guy closest at the front. So this is when I rearranged the boss. Me and Al then started stacking. All the problems went away. I'm back over here, now got lost. And this is where Bilbo dies, because he was ever so slightly too close to me, and now wasn't quite there. So you can use this to analyze things like who died, why did they die, how did they die. So we can use this to figure out why did our good friend Mr. Dwartz explode? He was just within the explosions and he exploded. And that's really all that there is to it. This isn't so much a him being an idiot problem as it was, if you can look, there was one healer in range for that entire group. And then we had every other healer grouped up over here. So this was a strategy issue. This was a problem of Dwarfs can look at this and go, well, that's not my fault. I did it right. I was grouped up with people where they should have been grouped up. We were doing what was supposed to be done mechanically, but it's just the healers didn't follow to keep the group that transferred over alive. And you can even look at this as an example of look at everybody's DPS. Everybody who was over there, they got pretty hammered except for Fries because he's a cheater. Um, Everybody else got decently injured because of it. And you can see that the raid very much, congregated on one side when they really shouldn't have. So this is something that, as a raid leader, I will sometimes go through, analyze our victories on some of the more hard fought fights, figure out what the issues are, how we could fix up some of the problems we've had, things of this nature. Um, so next up, and I'm gonna continue to pick on our good friend Warts here. So we're gonna go to WoW Analyzer. We're gonna load it up. We're gonna throw up that log. We're gonna check out Mr. Dwartz. So on this particular fight, Dwartz had a few issues in regards to using his cooldowns effectively. His Touch of Death was not maintained as much as possible. He didn't cast Touch of Karma at all. I know this is all stuff he's already looked at, so therefore I can point this at him. So as an example on this fight, this might be a fight where he would go, okay, well what I'm going to do is I'm going to Touch of Karma the boss, run to the face, get a cleave, run back. It'll do a shit ton of damage. I'll get to survive. Sweet. Or if he had thought of it, he could have used Touch of Karma when he was dying off in the corner, and that would have helped dramatically. Stuff of this nature. He's not using Touch of Death anywhere near enough. It's showing how much absorb from the Touch of Karma was used. This will often tell you that it's not a good idea to have this high, but in reality, DPS wise, it is. It depends on what your utilization of that talent, of that skill, will be for that fight. For some fights, you're using it offensively. For others, if there's a lot of ongoing damage, so a great example of that would be Zekvaz. You don't want to purposely proc Touch of Karma on that fight, but it's something you want to have up on cooldown every single time it's up because there's constantly damage going out. So this is going to be showing that, his Rising Sun Kick and Fist of Fury were not cast often enough. It was on cooldown for a very substantial portion of the fight. Um, it gets a little bit weird to analyze this in regards to if you died, but point still stands. Fist of the White Tiger, he wasn't using his Fist of the White Tiger, so that's an easy avenue of improvement that he can go. You look at this, you go, okay, so Fist of Fury more, Rising Sun Kick more, Rolling Dragon Punch more, Touch of Death, Touch of Karma. Okay, so there's like 7 things that he could have used. Um, the Blackout Kick cooldown reduction. So this one here, this is a fucking enormous DPS modifier for a Windwalker monk. Shh. Um, One sec. I'm doing the stream now to teach people things. So you can go watch that if you want. Okay then. Shh. Um. Bye now. Um. So you have just go through and Cylindra. Huh? What does? No, I don't put onions on the kids. Um. So yeah, using your defensive cooldowns, it'll tell you if you're fucking up when you really shouldn't have been. Well prepared. So, did you use your pre-pots? Did you use your second pots? What was your enchantment level like? So, he was missing an enchant on one of his weapons, or one of his items. Bad juju. Probably because he got an upgrade that raid, but it's something he should go back, double check it, figure out what the problem was. Um, your Fist of Fury proc. So, so for example, all specs have their own variation of tracking the shit. So for example, for Fist of Fury, you're going to get 5 ticks. How many ticks is he laying into a target every single time? So if you're coming in at less than 5, you're doing it wrong. How much time was spent moving? This is going to be a mostly relevant factor for range characters versus melee characters, because the more time that you're moving, there's always ways that you can find to reduce those numbers. Whether it be pre-positioning for a mechanic, not relevant yet. We're still learning the fights. Over time, you need to learn where do I need to move, how many steps do I need to take, how can I minimize my movement, because each step that you're taking is reducing your DPS as caster, every single one. Um, so it's always something that is relevant. Distance moved, same gist. So for example, Dwarves could have used Transcendence, where before he popped out to go fight the ad, he could have popped transference in one spot, went out, fought the ad, transferred back, cuts down on his movement speed and his time spent moving dramatically, gives him more DPS time. It's all small things like this, but they all super add up. At the bottom, it's going to give you a timeline. Where did you die? He died here. You can tell because everything fell off. Whereas the rest of Touch of Carmen, Invoke Zuen kept going. Same with Storm, Earth, and Fire, because I'm guessing that that one doesn't. Oh, that's your cooldowns. Sorry. So this one will be showing you what your cooldowns are like. The red ones here will be showing modified traits, which meant that this is where you cast them when you really shouldn't have cast them. So a great example here was Rising Sun Kick was off cooldown. He could have cast it. He didn't. This one here, he should have cast Rising Sun Kick earlier. Instead, he clicked cast Blackout Kick, which, given that Blackout Kick reduces the cooldown of Rising Sun Kick, something he could look at for future improvements. This is all stuff that a lot of people are looking at this and going, oh, this is freaking useless. There was a discussion about this in freaking Amnesty chat today about this not being necessary or relevant information. It 100% is. You just have to know how to read it. So at the top, it's going to be showing your GCD, what's triggering it, and you need to figure out how you can use them optimally. So there were 3 blackout kicks that were cast instead of a Fist of Fury. Here, there was a Rising Sun kick cast, which if he cast it earlier, that could have been 2 or 3 Rising Sun kicks, and that could have been a Fist of the Fury, which would have been a DPS gain across the board. Here, 2 casts Rising Sun kick when Fist of Fury was available. Shit like this. It all adds up. It's all something that you need to be paying attention to, because it makes a big ass difference for your performance in the grand scheme. So this is all very, very relevant. Your death touch, sorry, not death touch, but death recap. So this is going to be telling you, where did you screw up? Where did other people screw up? How can you fix it? What can you improve? This is basically the same thing as the damage taken meter, just it's honestly a lot easier to read. This is telling him you had both Dampen Harm and Touch of Karma available. You didn't use any of it from the moment you started taking damage until the moment you died. Duartz, you're a dirty, dirty boy. Abilities. This one here, for if you are a monk, for example, there are certain classes that have amazingly superb support on here. Windwalker Monk is one of the most supported classes on here in the game. Duartz could almost single-handedly use this goddamn log to improve his performance just by going through this after every fight, because this will make that this is that well honed in regards to performance that you can use this to completely set up and figure out what your problems are and hit a 90% parse just by fixing the problems, just by getting your numbers where they should be, stuff like that. So for example, Fist of Fury, it was only on cooldown for 36% of the fight. That could have been a lot higher. Rising Sun Kick, same problem. Whirling Dragon Punch, same problem. There were a lot of casts, and we saw that up above. There were during the timeline. There were a lot of casts that could have been better optimized. That would have increased his DPS a lot more dramatically. Chi Wave, for example, is a filler. Chi Wave is not actually a huge DPS gain. It's just something you do. Chi management, so that's telling you what you're doing. He never overcapped his chi. That's great. Cooldowns, this is telling you how much damage each of your cooldowns is doing when you use them, what abilities you use during them, blah, 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 all that shit. And these are all, again, relevant things. Change logs, it's a thing. It's basically telling you who the recent contributors were, what modifications they made to the parse, stuff like that. It doesn't really matter. And this one here is incredibly in depth. It is going to tell you from minute 1 of the fight every single action that you took, every piece of damage you dealt, every proc you had, every melee attack you did, everything. This has absolutely everything that happened during that fight under this list. If you know how to read this, you can literally just scroll down and just go, oh, I fucked up this. Oh, I fucked up that. Oh, I fucked up this. You can literally go through this and identify every single goddamn portion of your fight, what went wrong. If you know your spec, you can identify what went wrong and break it down, figure out every single part of it piece by piece, and up your performance through that method. So it's a relevant thing to keep in mind for some characters, for some players. Some people don't know their specs deeply enough to be able to utilize something like this. Soul could probably use this pretty goddamn well because he should know offhand where his cooldowns were, what his shit is. I mean, he's been playing the spec for what 30 years, so he should have this maximized by this point. Yep. Yep, and that's what I was saying earlier about the tracking of movement, right? If you want to have your movement as low as possible, so as an example, I will do exactly as you said. Let's go Dwarts. Let's change one to Exaro, one to Soul Leech, so I can open up both of you at the same time. Hope it doesn't crash. So yeah, both of your downtimes were fairly minimal. For some reason, he doesn't have a downtime tracker for whatever reason, but whatever. His Siphon Life uptime was pretty good. His Agony uptime was pretty good. His Corruption uptime was good. No like small differentiations there, but not enormous ones. The big difference is time spent moving 26%, time spent moving 28%. Distance moved 150, so you were using your teleport gates, you were using your demonic circles, whatever, to reduce the amount of travel you actually did. So that way you were traveling less time, but you traveled more distance. So it's the use of the secondary abilities. And he didn't use those, so those make a difference, right? So once again, ba-ba-bum, he's rocking the exact same fucking thing. Why is this stupid thing? Let's try refreshing. Um, so now you can. This is part of it. Like if you know somebody who plays the spec, and if you can get a log for one of them, you can literally just go through and just break it down piece by piece where they made mistakes, where you did it right, stuff like that. I don't know about your spec to actually make any real commentary, to be honest with you. Um, so I can't actually speak too much as to the differentiations. No, what I mean by that is I don't know enough about affliction to be able to comment properly. Um, but yeah, so these are the basic. This time delay is a piece of shit. Um, so these are all the basics that any DPS and honestly healers can use to improve how their information works. For example, even Opie, if Opie wanted to go through this, Opie could go through here. He can look at this, figure out was I mitigating enough? My mitigation was terrible. Frankly, it's because I have a tendency of holding back on the Iron Skin Bruise unless I am taking enough damage to qualify to use Iron Skin. If I'm taking enough that the healers, um, if I'm taking little enough damage that the healers don't need to really be pouring heals into me, if I can keep it up myself or I can keep it up with them, because of my spec, I don't want to use my Iron Skin Brews because I can save those for purifying brews constantly. Stuff like that, it's not always the right call to follow exactly what they say, and this is a relevant factor. So for example, for me, my brew time was apparently terrible. Sure. My rushing Jade uptime was bad. That I will agree. I need to work on. My blackout strikes weren't perfect. My keg smashes were wrong. All right, I can accept most of these because this was like my third boss raid tanking on a brewmaster, and I was trying to watch the raid while doing it. I made mistakes. I can learn how to address it. I can work on it. Um, But once again, you can go through here. You can see what your mitigation is. You can see how much damage your individual classes dealt, how your individual classes dealt with that those problems. So a great example is a class I know little about. Let's go check out Now on Blood. So, for example, he didn't actually use up all of his runes at times. He was sitting on runes unnecessarily at points. Ugh. Um, he did fine. He didn't waste any. He was very, very solid on his death strikes. His bloodworm stats were very, very solid. His death strikes were good, not perfect, but very good. His downtime was minimal. Bone shield uptime good. However, if you look at this, his Merrowwind, that's something he needs to work on because he was doing good with regards to two of his casts, but seven of them he was wasting stacks of his Merrowwind from getting useless points on his Bone Shield, which meant that that's a loss of resources. He could have put that into more damage. He could have put that into other defensive abilities. He could have put that into whatever else, right? Um, and but through this, he can go through and he can go, okay, so here's where I made mistakes. Here's what I can fix, and just go through and figure it all out. Same thing with him. He can figure out what did I use runes on, why did I use them, did I have other options. He can go through his ability usage, figure out what are things that I can fix, what are things that I can improve. He never uses Arcane Torrent. What a scrub, right? I mean, there's so many things to interrupt Unfettered Devour, but it's all small things like that. Um, and it doesn't seem like a lot. Sometimes you look at this and go, okay, this is all useless information. It's really not. It's just how much value you're going to get out of it will really depend on how much work you put into it. The more work that you put into it, the more value you're going to get from it. All right? If you don't take the time to learn how to do this, you're going to do it badly. Completely, to be completely frank, you need to put in the effort, or you're not going to get anywhere. If you go to statistics, for example, on this fight, let's use a random person. Let's pick on second core. Eh, I like picking on like core. It's fun. So here, for example, you can go through and you can see what the breakdowns were, what her talents were. She would know what her talents were from the logs, and she can go through and look and see. Oh, so these are the go-to talents for for the top 100 logs for your spec, and go through and figure out what can I do to fix it. Trinkets, she could buy Fathoms. I don't know if she has the gold for it, but in theory, that's something she could do for a substantial gain of DPS. She could switch her talents over to Viper's Venom. I know she wasn't rocking that. She could switch. She was perfect on Bloodseeker. She could switch over to Mongoose Bite because, again, another potentially very relevant thing. It's just small things, right? This guide, between this and Wild Logs, you should be able to find out, not in advance, but after analysis, after doing a raid night, you should be able to go through, find out what your problems are, isolate them, and figure it out. Some people say, oh, but this isn't optimized for my spec. No, it's not. But you know what? There's still a shit ton of information here if you know your class at all. You know what I mean? If you know your class, there's a lot of things you can learn and get from this. If you don't, well, too bad, so sad. That's nobody's fault except for your own not putting in the time. You know what I mean? So, for the future, this is something everybody should be looking at. These two websites, in combination with Blood Mallet, you should be able to go through and see every single factor of your stuff, your secondary attribute designs. So, like Horror wants as much fucking haste as humanly possible. Azurite traits, she can figure out what are my best traits. Hell, if you want, you can really just completely trivialize gearing and just go through and figure out, hey, these are my highest pieces. Let's go target these. So Coif of the Court Spider, that's her highest DPS headpiece. Fucking Dread Gladiator chain shoulder guards, that's her highest DPS shoulder. This shit trivializes so much of the math work, of the figuring out shit. It makes it easy if you know how to read it and if you know how to put it into practice. And that's what it's going to come down to. It's going to come down to people putting in the work. And this is why we're giving everybody 2 weeks. 2 weeks to get in there, learn your spec, learn all your numbers, get shit where it needs to be. If after 2 weeks it's not there, if after 2 weeks you're going into a fight and going, oh, I didn't know that this mechanic did this. You should know that that mechanic does that. You should know that if you damage the little ugly cyst things on the floor of Gahoon, they're going to get smaller. That is a core piece of information that everybody should have. If you don't have it, it means you didn't look up any information, because that is one of the most advertised components of the fight. So everybody should know that. So what we're asking is just for people to do the basic work. Run your WoW analyzer, because even if you don't feel like going into depths on your fucking logs, you can go through your WoW analyzer. You can figure out your talent problems. You can figure out trinket upgrades you could be aiming for. You can figure out what your cast issues were, what your uptime problems were, focus cap, mana wastage, shard wastage. How many? If you're a frost mage, you can figure out how many of your ice lances you munched on for no reason. You can figure out all of this shit just from looking here. And that is a super relevant thing. That is something you need to be looking at. For example, a big thing here, Magic Eraser needs to get better at using his blink. Simple. If he uses his blink more often, he won't need to cancel casts as often, which will up his DPS. Because as soon as you start a cast, stopping it, you're already losing a giant chunk of DPS from that half of a second, because it's using your GCD. It's using the cast of it, so you're losing a second or two of DPS time. Remember, DPS damage for damage per second. If you're losing 2 seconds of damage, your DPS goes down a lot. If you do that 17 times, it goes down a lot. You do it 20 times, more. Keep an eye on all of the statistics. I don't care about the checklist. Ignore it. That's not even relevant. You should know your class well enough to be able to go through the statistics, go through the statistics, and be able to analyze what did I do, what was wrong, what can I fix. If you can do that, you can help. Here's the I guarantee you, this is the biggest reason why Draenol's numbers were lower. He had almost 40% of the fight in movement. Just movement. That's a lot of fucking movement. That's going to hurt his numbers so much compared to somebody who keeps it 20-25%. And a big thing to keep in mind is that this is a class with blink. You can use the blink. The blink will reduce the penalties of movement. You can travel a massive amount of space and not actually lose as much DPS, because blink doesn't, if you're a mage, blink doesn't even interrupt your cast times. Stuff like this. And it all adds up. It's all relevant, and that's all I really have to say about it. Is just pay attention to the little things, because people ignore the little things, but you're doing 1,000 more little things than you are big things. And all those little things, if you're screwing up half of them, you might think, oh, it's just a little thing. Enough little things grow up to be a really fucking big thing. It's the whole fable, was it parable about the bee and the bear? 1,000 bees can take down a bear. Sure, they're only small, but there's a lot of them. And that's it. I'm done. That's basically what I had for tonight. It's about an hour. Anybody who watched after the fact, I will have this link up in Amnesty chat for those of you who were here. If you have any questions, anything like that, pop them out. Let's go. Look at all these major problems, right? um, all right. Well, that's it for tonight. That's it for tonight, boys. We will talk about more stuff later.